Good morning, everyone. We call this meeting of the Committee of Finance and Economic Affairs to order. We're meeting to resume public hearings on Bill 185, an act to amend various acts. Three presenters will be McMaster University, Environmental Defense, and George Brown College. With that, McMaster University.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to you and to the members of the committee. My name is Sahir Fizilat. I am the Vice President of Operations and Finance for McMaster University. In my role, I oversee university's administrative, financial, and ancillary services, as well as provide leadership for our substantial infrastructure portfolio. This includes $5 billion in financial assets, 400 acres of land, and over 10 million square feet of building space. Numbers that continue to grow as we expand to accommodate more space for our growing student population. We are one of Hamilton's largest anchor institution, employer, and economic driver. Though our presence is not limited just to Hamilton, as we have campuses in Burlington, Waterloo, and Niagara region. We are with a very strong and growing presence in downtown Hamilton. Our main campus is in West Hamilton along 403 corridor. A KPMG study commissioned in 2017 estimated our economic impact on Southern Ontario as $3.9 billion annually through jobs created, research, development, and talent creation. This impact has grown substantially since then. We are one of Canada's most research-intensive universities, and by many counts, one of the top 100 global universities. Some of our health sciences programs rank in top quartile in the world. This reputation brings in a very strong domestic and global demand, resulting in the need for more resident beds. For many years, we have not been able to guarantee domestic first-year students a resident bed. Therefore, since 2017, we have embarked on a journey to add more beds. By the end of 2026, we will complete over 2,800 new student beds, adding more than 50% to our current inventory. In fact, McMaster is building the most new resident housing in Ontario. This is important for so many reasons, not the least of which is taking pressure off the local housing market. But there are also proven academic advantages for students who live in university residences. Dorm living is ideal scenario for university students, and especially for first-year undergraduates. Research has shown the students living in residence build strong friendship and great sense of community, have higher self-esteem, are more satisfied with their university experience, and perform better academically. But these projects come at a tremendous cost, along with dwindling options for financing these buildings. Operating funds for universities have come under severe stress due to frozen tuition and lack of funding. Since we lack capital to build residences ourselves, it will come as no surprise to the committee that our most recent housing projects are in large part enabled by public-private partnerships, and that their timeline have been severely protracted by onerous requirements in the Planning Act. Let me give an example. Just this past fall, construction began on a new 1,400-bedded undergraduate residence. We call it Lincoln Alexander Hall. A private-public partnership that will build our largest residence yet and will allow us to finally offer guaranteed residence spaces to all our first-year undergraduates. This project has been in works for many years. Our first Planning Act engagement with city planners to start the official plan and zoning process was back in the spring of 2017. Shovels finally hit the ground in November of 2023. A good 6.5 years later. Even if one counts the delay of the pandemic, this is nowhere near reasonable. Given a 30-month construction cycle, we would have by now nearly 1,400 students living in the state-of-the-art residence, and they will now have to wait until 2026. Timing aside, while many Planning Act requirements make sense for commercial building projects, that does not hold true for universities, which are unique in that we build and maintain our own infrastructure, roads, pipes, and even our own security and safety teams, including special constable services. We are a city within a city. Okay, take parking. It makes sense generally for cities to use Planning Act authorities to create rules around parking in most cases by establishing a ratio of parking spaces for a number of units in a building. People drive to and from home and work, and they need somewhere to park. But applying this requirement to purpose-built student residence buildings where students live and study doesn't make sense, especially when most students, particularly those choosing to live in residence, don't own cars. Precious time is wasted each time the university proposes a major building project, haggling over parking that could be spent getting shovels in the ground, building residence spaces and creating jobs for workers. Given the limited availability of land, surface parking lots are not sufficient to meet the unrealistic parking demand. We have to divert financial resources to build expensive parking structures and underground parking, which come at 10 times the cost of a surface parking space. Hence, taking the capital dollars away from meaningful construction that support housing and our academic and research mission. That's why McMaster is so pleased to see the proposed exemption for universities from Planning Act, including in Bill 185. These changes recognize the unique circumstances of university infrastructure, the communities we build, maintain, as well as the critical needs to get student housing built faster and cheaper. With the universities exempted from onerous and disconnected building permits process, projects will be completed faster. This is imperative as the demand to come to McMaster and Hamilton continues to grow. I appreciate this opportunity to appear this morning, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next presentation will be the environmental defense.
Good afternoon. My name
Good
is
morning.
Phil. My name is Phil. Oh, good morning. Sorry. Yeah. I got up at 4:30 today, so it's been a long day already. Good afternoon. My name is Phil Pothin. I'm Council, Land Use and Land Development Program Manager and Ontario Environment Program Manager with the charity Environmental Defense. Our nonpartisan team of experts is focused on identifying and advocating for the most effective policies to safeguard Ontario's natural heritage and species at risk and prevent runaway climate change, but also to fix problems like environmental racism and classism that can be produced by housing shortages in existing neighborhoods. We have been consistent about telling government that there is no way to solve these problems, and in particular, the housing shortage, without removing the zoning, building code, and other direct regulatory barriers to building enough homes within Ontario's existing neighborhoods, especially low-rise residential neighborhoods, to house everyone, every household that wants to live in Ontario, and enough to transform all of our existing car-dependent post-World War II developments, low-density developments, into denser, walkable, and transit-supporting complete communities, where most people don't feel they need a car to live comfortably, even if they choose to have one. And ensuring that none of the farmland that was already designated for development before 2022 is wasted at low density. The floor should be around 100 people per hectare, and permanently slamming the brakes on outward expansion of settlement boundaries. Ontario needs to shift most of the wood frame construction that we've been wasting on low-rise top-ups and McMansions and low-density greenfield subdivisions to wood frame, mid-rise building, and townhomes within what are now low-rise, single, and semi-detached neighborhoods. It's the only path that's going to get us enough homes quick enough, and it happens to also be the only path that's really compatible with environmental sustainability. Keep in mind that there never, during this government's time in office, has been any case to be made that more land would help increase housing output. There was already more than enough unbuilt farmland within settlement boundaries before 2022 to accommodate all Southern Ontario's future homes and workplaces, more than 350 square kilometers in the GTHA alone. Housing output was and is being constrained by construction capacity. We urge this committee not to exploit the long overdue and helpful reform of getting rid of parking requirements in major transit station areas as a mere sugar coating for what is really a poison pill for both housing supply and the environment. In order to prevent that, we urge this committee to amend this draft bill as follows. Firstly, delete in their entirety sections 4.6 and 5.6 of Schedule 2, which in combination with the new PPS and growth plan that are proposed would allow agricultural landlords to force municipal governments to deal with requests for settlement boundary expansion at any time in an out-of-context ad hoc basis. We want you to delete in its entirety Section 1 sub 1, which would strip Halton, Peel, and York Region of their control over land use planning in those regions, and thereby remove the kind of coordination that's really required in order to get the more efficient use of construction capacity that we need. Thirdly, insofar as we are keeping sections 3.1, 3.3, and 5 sub 7 of Schedule 12, which prevent third-party appeals of development proposals at all, they should be amended to apply only to decisions that directly or indirectly increase the number of units permitted within the existing built-up areas of relevant municipalities. This is about, the pretext here is about dealing with NIMBYism, not in my backyard. And it makes no sense to control third-party appeals in places that are literally in no one's backyard, where the dynamic of people subjugating housing supply to their own views and shadows and their aesthetic ideas of their neighborhood, that doesn't arise when what's being proposed is farmland development. And that's the only reason for eliminating third-party appeals. Eliminating third-party appeals in the context of greenfield development is a recipe, let's be clear, for corruption, because there is no more attractive environment for corruption than a case where a single decision by a lower-tier municipal government can transfer huge amounts of wealth to an individual, and all that they need to do is get a few votes together to do that. If there is no scrutiny so what this bill would do is remove Ontario Land Tribunal scrutiny from those most corruption-prone decisions.
I'm taking offense to the word corruption.
Yep, order.
Well, I'm asking you to prevent corruption, and let's be clear. Corruption is not as people think. Yes, well, I don't think I was ruling against it. People say that people like to pretend that corruption is a product of bad people or unethical people. Really, corruption is a product of bad processes. Corruption happens whenever the light of day doesn't shine. Whenever there's a process that doesn't put every part of the decision under public scrutiny, whenever there is nobody to check up on your decision and check whether it actually is justified, and that's what this bill would do. It would remove OLT oversight from those decisions, then you get corruption. And it doesn't matter how good you think you are. The thing that distinguishes us from those other places where people think corruption is rampant is process. People in corruption-prone countries are not less ethical than we are. They just have processes like this one which create corruption. And so if you choose to approve this bill in this current form, you are choosing corruption, and the onus is on you, not the individuals, well, as well as the individuals who respond to that in the future.
Very much. That concludes the time for your presentation. Our next presenter will be the George Brown College. And I believe it's virtual, so the floor is yours.
Jill McCollum, Vice President of Facilities and Sustainability at George Brown College, and I'm honoured to be with you today to discuss Bill 185, to speak to the urgent need for support for affordable student housing solutions and to offer our support for mass timber construction. As a leading publicly accredited polytechnic institution, George Brown is making significant contributions to the vibrancy, productivity and prosperity of Ontario by supplying the workforce of today and tomorrow. We are very proud to represent over 20,000 full-time and over 30,000 part-time students across over 200 programs developed with industry for industry. Our three major campuses are all within the City of Toronto, with over 4,000 employees across teaching, faculty, support, staff and administrators. So today I really want to take the time to talk about this bill and how it can positively impact our students and community members, and talk about the importance of sustainability as we work together to provide solutions. So firstly, focusing on our students. At George Brown, we're taking a leading role in exploring housing needs and opportunities in Canada's most expensive city. As the demand for housing really increases and continues to rise, student housing plays a crucial role in the overall housing plans for the province and in solving the issues that we have. Providing affordable and accessible housing options for students not only supports their academic success, but also contributes to solving the broader housing shortage for our communities. We've been really undertaking extensive engagement with our students to understand the challenges that they're facing. And it's really important to note the diversity of our learners of George Brown and also in the college sector. While we do welcome many students just leaving high school, we also have many students who are entering our programs after other post-secondary education experiences and lifelong learners who may be adding to their skills or education or looking to change careers. And as we work towards finding the solutions to housing supply and affordability, we need to consider those diverse needs. Our students may be parents, may be carers, they may be working multiple jobs, they have important commitments outside of the learning environments while they're studying. And we know that commute times are really long. Most of our students commute over an hour, and we have a rising number of students who commute over 2 hours, both ways to get to and from campus. And, you know, layering in the important commitments they have outside of their studying, that's really challenging. So collectively, how can we provide a range of solutions through our communities and institutions that provide options for the differing needs of our learners? At George Brown, we're really actively pursuing opportunities to provide more housing solutions, and that's one of our key strategies, but it is really challenging. With higher interest rates and inflation, high construction costs, it's very hard to find solutions that will meet the needs of our students and be affordable and timely. Our development sites are complex and current processes are not conducive to being able to deliver in short timelines, even if we do have the capital dollars. And it becomes even more challenging in situations where we do have to explore public-private partnerships. But by working together, I am confident that we can find solutions, and we would be delighted to help explore what that can look like. But we also believe that these solutions need to be sustainable, and I'd like to talk a bit about that. You know, at George Brown, we're really leading the way in terms of mass timber construction through our Brookfield Sustainability Institute, and also in our latest construction project, Limberlost Place, which is currently under construction. Mass timber is crucial for the future of sustainable development in Ontario and for the future of our construction industry. Limberlost Place is Ontario's first 10-storey mass timber institutional use net zero carbon emission building. We've already won over 20 awards and we've not even opened yet. That's planned for next year. It's a learning lab for students and industry, unprecedented construction techniques, and all mass timber components sourced from sustainably managed Canadian forests. We have led the way in building code innovation. We have served as a demonstration project for de-risking and proof of concept to advance mass timber building technology. We are really proud to lead the way for the use of sustainable construction, and we deeply appreciate the government's support in ensuring this continues to transform our construction industry. We thank Minister Callander for visiting Limberlost Place, and also thank Minister Smith for partnering with us to host an industry roundtable in the fall of 2023. In closing, we welcome Bill 185 as an important step in the right direction. I encourage you to continue to partner with us in our sector in considering how we can support our learners and communities by providing affordable housing solutions and by leveraging the expertise and resources of educational institutions like George Brown College. Together, we can continue to drive innovation, promote sustainability, and build a brighter future for all of the residents in our province. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Now we will start the first round of questions, and we'll start with the official opposition, MPP Bell.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of you for coming in and presenting today. I have questions for each of you. I'd like to start with Phil Pothen from Environmental Defence. Thank you for expressing your concerns about the risk for increased corruption if the OLT does not have the oversight that it needs to have over land use planning decisions. Can you just clarify for me what your vote recommendations are? What would you like to see the government and all parties vote against, and what proposed amendments would you like to see added?
So we're asking this committee to vote to reject the bill overall unless it removes, deletes section 1 sub 1 in its entirety. That's the section that would strip Halton Region, Peel Region, and York Region over their control over land use planning. We'd ask you to delete in their entirety sections 4 sub 4 and 5 sub 6 of Schedule 2, which in combination with the growth plan and PPS removal would allow agricultural landowners to force municipal governments to deal with requests for settlement boundary expansions at any time, and thus cause ad hoc decision-making and prevent efficient use of construction capacity. And then thirdly, if sections 3 sub 1, 3 sub 3, and 5 sub 7 of Schedule 2 are retained, we want it to be scoped down to apply only to decisions to approve development within existing neighborhoods and built-up areas that increase the number of units permitted on an existing residential lot or an existing developed lot. It should exclude expressly from the right of appeal decisions about settlement boundary expansion and decisions to approve greenfield development, because those do not raise the process concerns that are really underlying the need for this. This is not a case where the decision-making or the community body that's engaged excludes the party that would benefit. You know, in a local decision-making, in an existing neighborhood, what you have is decisions about planning being made by a group of people that includes everyone who thinks they might suffer some downside from the development, but excludes the prospective residents who might not even live in the country yet, and certainly don't know that they'll be living in that building from that decision as well. So it's not a decision, a level at which democratic local decision making can really happen. Whereas with greenfield development, there's perfectly alignment between the two, both the costs and the benefits. Anybody who would potentially live in the housing is if they're in the region, you know, they're available to make the decision, and also the environmental effects are dealt with as well. So that makes much more sense to deal with at a higher level of decision making. There isn't a need to get rid of that intensive process or to deny third-party appeals. Third-party appeals in those cases would be broader public interest NGOs, not private interests, opposed to the public. And for example, it would be us, and we don't have any stake. I don't own a house outside the outskirts of Halton Region. We have a concern about the broader environmental impacts for all of Ontario, and that's an appropriate place for third-party appeals to happen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The second question I have is to Ms. Fazalat. Is that how I say it? From McMaster University.
Yeah, got it right.
Okay, so I have a few questions, okay, and I'm just going to ask them all at once and you can answer. How much does a dorm room cost for a student year? And then 2, when Colleges Ontario came in, they said that the Planning Act does not apply to public assisted universities and colleges already. And I was wanting to know, since it doesn't already apply, how does that removal help you?
So the second question first, and I'll go with the first question later. They do not apply to colleges, but they do apply to universities. That's the difference. So that's why, as a university, we're asking not speaking in favor of this bill. In terms of dorm rooms, as I mentioned in my opening remarks and my comments, if we build and operate a dorm room, we do an 8-month lease and we do it much cheaper. However, even when we go into private partnerships, we do it about 20% cheaper than the market. So, for example, we've opened a grad residence downtown, and that is costing $13.25 per bed, but that includes everything, utilities, internet, and whatnot. Whereas an apartment downtown Hamilton is close to $1,700-$1,800. On the undergraduate residence that we built and are on campus, we have about 4,400 beds. They vary between 800 to 1,100 on an 8-month lease. So both these buildings have full student support systems available. So again, it comes with everything that gets offered on campus. It is definitely a little bit pricier when we go out for private money, but still much cheaper than what the market offers.
Okay, so just to clarify, so with the $13.25 per bed a month, that includes food and additional services, or is that added on? I'm assuming it's added on.
That's added, but that's for graduate residents. The ones on campus are 800 to 1,100, depending on shared accommodation versus single accommodation.
Okay, and then just to clarify, then on top of that, there's additional things that you can buy into, such as the food plan, or is that included?
So there's a meal plan that is dictated by CRA, and the limit is established by a minimum a CRA threshold, and that is a plan that you can use to buy food, and you can take it over to the next year or next year. So again, there is that flexibility in there. But yes, meal plan is separate from the housing accommodation. Now, I also wanted to add that the operating funds don't pay for building these residences. We have to, the residences have to pay over a period of time the cost of building the residence even on campus, because there are ancillary services.
Okay, I've run out of time. I apologize, but I look forward to reading your submissions. And if I have any follow-up questions, I will be calling you directly.
Absolutely, happy to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to the independent MPP Hazel.
So good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming in and making your presentations to this committee. And I'm going to start off with McMaster University on the first round, and I will get to the others on my second round. And Sahar Fazilat, I hope I pronounced that right. Really thank you for, detailing your gaps, your challenges, your issues here to us. And I hear you. And we also know that Ontario has the lowest. We know this will impact the ability of universities to achieve a wide array of objectives, as you stated. And I also hear a lot about, budget pressures and funding issues. But despite the easing of the planning regulations for universities under this act, I want you to tell me did it really impact you building affordable homes for your students? And then do you anticipate that it will be, feasible for your institution to just build enough homes for your student, because we know it's almost a crisis right now. So I will give you my time to elaborate on those couple questions that I kind of put in between there.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned in my remarks, and I have actually built a lot of buildings in my earlier career across Southern Ontario. The cost of delay in permit processing, in going through the Planning Act, the cost of escalation for construction, while we're waiting for permit processes and Planning Acts, when we are actually operating within our boundaries that already have these buildings in place, is always costly. I mean, I'd give you an example where we started talking in 2017, we ended up putting a shovel just 6 months back. So definitely the cost of construction grows with time, and easiness, the time that is spent by resources, which is kind of considered intangible, can all be spent on building projects that are very timely, can be on time, on budget. Definitely finding other ways of supporting building these residences would be very helpful. Now, to your question, will it be sufficient? Yes, we have about 4,400 beds right now. We have done a demand study around the campus. It is about 8,000 needed beds. We're adding another 2,800 beds to our system here. A survey of all Ontario universities said that total of all Ontario universities are building about 9,000 beds, and of that, 33% are being built here at McMaster. So again, we are reaching our goal and target. Can we build more and accommodate more students and bring them? Absolutely. Again, it's a balancing act, but definitely these changes will help us expedite and have more dollars to spare and build a little bit more.
Good. Thank you. I want to go with the little bit of time I have.
1 minute.
You've mentioned, Phil, you've mentioned a term that I've never heard before, so if you could take that couple minutes and I'll come back to you in my next round. You mentioned environmental racism. Can you elaborate further for me on that statement?
Sure. I mean, environmental racism fundamentally is about disproportionately adverse effects on racialized groups. So if you have a policy which, or a state of affairs which results, even if it's completely unintentional, has nothing to do with the purpose of the policy, in less environmental benefits being given to particular racialized groups in practice, or more environmental benefits being given to non-racialized groups or particular groups, relatively speaking, then that's environmental racism. And so one of the best obvious ways that this is manifested is in a country like Canada, where income is still very much...
That concludes the time. We'll now go to the government. MPP Harris.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you to all the presenters that are here today, virtually and in person. I did want to focus my comments initially around McMaster. I know you've been getting a lot of airtime this morning, but I think it's important because when we look at some of the provisions of this bill and what they're going to do to be able to help student housing be built at universities, I think it's very important. I know George Brown obviously has a lot of these provisions as a college already. So I did want to just start with McMaster and get a little bit more of a feeling as far as the planning process goes and how long it takes you to actually build student housing. You had mentioned in your opening remarks that it had taken almost a decade to get a project complete, and quite frankly, that's too long, regardless of whether there's a housing crisis or not. 10 years to build student dormitories is far too long. So could you walk us through a little bit of that process of sort of the last building or residence that you have built, and how, again, you feel that this bill can help streamline some of those, well, quite frankly, pieces of red tape?
Yeah, so thank you very much, and through you, Chair. As I said in my opening remarks, it took us 6.5 years just to get a permit. And it'll take 30 months to build the building. 1,400 bedded residence, which is our largest offering. Normally, we have 300, 100, up to 600 in our. So normally we offer those kinds of beds. This is a 1,400 bedded residence. We will build it in 30 months. However, it took us 6.5 years to actually reach the point of putting the shovel in the ground. And that's quite acceptable in the sense of not only the time and effort that went in getting there, and also the cost escalation. We all know what the cost per square foot was in 2017, what the cost per square foot is today. Year over year, construction industry has seen a 30% uptick in the last 3 years in terms of construction costs. So again, a huge loss opportunity there by waiting for the planning processes to play through.
The planning process that you had to go through in that 6.5 years, can you tell us what some of the major hurdles were, and why? Like, why did it take so long?
I joined McMaster in 2021, but I can relay what my predecessor told me and some of the documents that I've seen. There were challenges with the development charges, and I know many Ontario universities are exempt from development charges, but some still had to pay development charges up until 2020. And the recognition of the school, the residence as a school owned and operated entity was challenged. Then there were permitting challenges. We had to go through Planning Act. So many of those things that could have been easily avoided were being worked on both sides, and resources were spent on both sides, which unnecessarily added to the time and effort. And again, neither side is to be blamed in this. I think so. It's more on the process side that needs to be cleaned up.
I want to flip over to George Brown for a second, because you already have provisions in your statutes where you are already exempt from much of the municipal planning process and sort of adjacent pieces of red tape. And I'm just wondering if you might be able to comment on some of the residences that George Brown has put together over the last couple of years, and just how that process has gone, and wondering if it's been a little bit smoother than what you've heard so far from the folks from McMaster.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. So George Brown currently just has one residence. We have 500 beds. Our residence was previously the Pan Am Athletes Village. So that really was a partnership project. I have to tell you that the provisions that are there for colleges to leverage as part of the Crown is actually something that we've not frequently used, and I'll explain why. Irrespective of whether we go through a building permit process, we still have to comply with the building code. And so that means that we still have to ensure that we have code consultants on board. It's really, it's a complex process. There are liability issues there. Certainly from a planning provision, there are important aspects within the Planning Act. There are important protection that we have to make for our communities, things like flooding and things like that we have to think about with our conservation authorities. I agree with Saher, the process is the issue, the combination of the different levels of government, the process that you have to go through, that creates the problem. The actual part of the pieces of the Planning Act and legislation are there for good reason, but we have to figure out a way of really shortening the process, but still protecting the important pieces of that development process.
I'll turn it over to one of my colleagues. Thank you.
MPP Ray.
Thank you, MP Harris and Chair. My very brief question, we can probably come back to in the second round. Sorry, I should pull my mic up. Is for George Brown. I know you mentioned in your remarks around mass timber, and I know our government's made some changes around that with the building code to 18 stories. Can you just explain a little more about your experiences in particular with mass timber? And I know from our perspective in the government, we really think it's an innovative solution and offer an opportunity for home builders across Ontario.
Yeah, definitely through the chair, and thank you so much for the question. So mass timber really, we're very excited by our 10-story institutional building. Delighted to see the government pushing to 18 stories. I think it's really transformative. Mass timber really is an amazing form of modular construction, and so what that offers is speed. There are efficiencies. We're feeding back into our research and development through our construction process into the construction industry, so the whole sector can learn from what we're doing at George Brown. So certainly, as we're thinking about future developments, housing, mass timber is lightweight, can be faster. The amount of embodied carbon that certainly within our building, it's over 2,300 cars a year off the road equivalent per year, every year by our one building. So it shows you just the difference that this can make.
We'll now go to the official opposition, MPP Bell.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Michelle McCollum from George Brown College. I was really interested in what you had to say about the work that you're doing with mass timber. So I've got the first question I have is, can you just give me a bit of a summary around what amount of student housing do you have, and what is the amount of student housing that you plan on building? Just
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we currently have just over 500 beds. Traditionally, student housing was not as prevalent in the college system as it is in the university sector. We have less high school leavers, and so our average age is around 24 years old is our average student age. So the housing needs are different. However, we know that we currently have a waiting list of over 500 students looking for a bed in Toronto. Our price point, we have individual rooms, they're around $1,300 a month, and those are leased on a per semester basis. We know we need to add more housing. Development sites in Toronto are difficult. We do have ownership of several key institutional sites, but those are all brownfield sites that currently have academic operations and would be difficult to develop. That said, with low weight mass timber, there are opportunities to think about height and to think about density on some of our existing campuses. We do want to increase. We're actively looking at solutions and opportunities just now. We know we need multiple, but we want to add many hundreds of more beds. And we recognize that solving the housing affordability and availability issues for our students really contributes to the broader community, as we have less students who are looking and competing with other people looking for housing solutions in the city.
Thank you. Catherine, I've got one more question. Okay, so I've got one more quick question, so I'd appreciate if you could answer it briefly. When Colleges Ontario came in, they talked about how one of the challenges they have is that they're not able to easily access financing to build new projects. And they recommended that there was some changes to Ontario legislation to make it easier for them to leverage financing to get the capital they need to start a project. Is that something that George Brown is also experiencing and would be recommending?
Yes, absolutely. As part of the 24 colleges in Ontario, we are limited with where we can borrow money from the province. So the latest announcement about federal opportunities, we are limited. We could not do that the way the legislation currently stands.
Thank you for that. I appreciate your time.
MPP 5.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to all presenters, Sahir, Phil, and Michelle. Appreciate your time and expertise that you're sharing with us this morning. Phil, in Schedule 12 of the Planning Act, of Bill 185, an unproclaimed section of Bill 23 eliminated the planning responsibilities for Halton, Peel, York, Simcoe, Durham, Niagara, and Waterloo. And Bill 185 allows for this provision to come into force for Halton, Peel, York no later than this July, but for each of the other affected upper tier municipalities, the provision comes into force upon proclamation. There's huge concerns around this in Waterloo Region, and I know that you know this, but unlike most Ontario cities and communities, we have no greenbelt protections, this can be corrected, and no freshwater pipelines to the Great Lakes. So we're totally dependent on living within the carrying capacity of our watersheds. Waterloo Region has developed robust planning practice processes and tools and environmental protections, which find that balance, right? Because we have a countryside line around our region, to find that balance between farmland, urban development, and preventing sprawl. I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about how dangerous this can be when there is no comprehensive or coordinated planning process at the upper level, where the lower tiers, those lower tier municipalities could have detrimental impact on water recharge and on planning processes.
Sure. So it's really important to remember that effects on watershed, effects on flooding often are cumulative, which means that you cannot look at an individual applicant settlement boundary expansion request and say, oh, we know that this will be okay, unless you know which other requests you're going to say yes to and which other ones you're going to say no to. You can't identify what location is the best place that will have the minimum adverse effect. This system, which this legislation would propose, does not allow a municipality to say, okay, if we build here, we'll be able to get the same number of homes without causing flooding, so let's not approve in these other locations. There's no mechanism for that kind of decision to happen here, and so as a result, you can end up both causing flooding inadvertently because of cumulative effect and major environmental harm. You can end up wiping out all the habitat for a particular species, but you can also sterilize or sacrifice a lot of housing because the first two applicants out the door were in the less optimal locations, and now there's no more capacity left for the third applicant. And so this is a recipe. That's partly the individual applications allowing extension of the settlement boundary at any time, but it's also lower tier municipalities because the best place in a region is not always within your lower tier municipality. And so, for example, in Halton region, it makes much more sense to put housing in existing neighborhoods of Oakville and Burlington and not in greenfield areas in Milton and Halton Hills.
Thank you. Do you think that people understand how costly sprawl is? I mean, because this is, people, of course, the government is trying to make a case that we have to build these homes outside of pre-approved boundaries on environmentally sensitive land and on farmland. Do you think that people who live in existing homes in those communities understand how much it's going to cost them to move ahead with those plans?
I think more and more they're starting to understand, but the problem is we're creating a system where they can't know the relationship between their decision about allowing housing in their neighborhood and the sprawl that happens. So by delegating this to lower tier municipalities or farming it off to lower tier municipalities, you take away the ability of someone in Oakville to say, okay, I can stop that costly sprawl from happening by saying yes to housing in my neighborhood.
We now go to the independent MPP Hazel.
So, Phil, I'm going to continue my question with you. The last question I asked was for the record to detail the environmental racism statement. You started, you didn't finish. Can you finish that? And then I have another question for you.
All right. So when, as in our current system, we have the most sought after neighborhoods are restricted in the type of housing that they can build. So the neighborhoods closest to where we are now, if you have a single family detached neighborhood and you can't build denser housing, you'll see very clearly that those become the neighborhoods where racialized people are disproportionately excluded because we still have unequal distribution of income right now across Canada. So if you don't allow denser housing in existing neighborhoods, you end up excluding disproportionately certain racialized communities from those neighborhoods. And then secondly, by putting the housing, basically we're saying we're not putting it in existing neighborhoods. What you're effectively doing is you're effectively exiling disproportionately newcomers to farm fields on the outskirts rather than making room for them in the most desirable existing neighborhood. There should be no street that does not have a place for everyone of any income. It should not be the case that being a newcomer means you have to pick a certain neighborhood because the better neighborhoods are off limits from you. That's not a acceptable state of affairs in a society that doesn't want to be racist. You have to allow the forms of housing, unless you want to unilaterally, level income in one shot, which we haven't done. That means that you have to ensure that income doesn't determine what neighborhood you can live in. And so access to treated streets and good transit access is available to people regardless of income. An affluent street should not be able to say no to a fourplex. It should not be able to say no to a mid-rise building. And the good news is Toronto is doing the right things now. Toronto is starting to allow 6-story mid-rise building using wood frame construction that directly is the same construction capacity, the same trades that build low-rise housing. And each and every home that would get built using sprawl as a result of this development is coming at the expense of that housing in existing neighborhoods because they're competing head to head for the same trades. What we really need to do is legalize the fourplex in this legislation, put that back in, get rid of prohibitions on mid-rise up to 6 stories, look at what Toronto is doing, and make that an as of right universal policy across existing neighborhoods, and slam the brakes on any further boundary expansion rather than making it easy and rigging the system.
Yeah, I want to add a second question. So we know that this government is doubling down on their pro-sprawl ideology with this legislation. So I'm talking about the impact it has on the environment and especially the sprawl. That's an issue. In your words, can you articulate to me why this is a wrong approach? And even the own Housing Affordability Task Force has said that in their report as well.
The government's Housing Affordability Task Force, RBC, the rate report, they all say that both for the environment but also just for plain housing supply, we have to shift the type of housing we built to denser housing types rather than low-density housing types. We have to shift housing to existing neighborhoods. When we build sprawl, and that means when we build on greenfield, when we could be building in existing neighborhoods, and when we build at densities less than 100 people per hectare, we aren't just unnecessarily destroying farmland and natural heritage, we are also locking in, over the long term, much higher greenhouse gas emissions for each and every one of those people. There's a many-fold change in carbon emissions if someone lives in an existing neighborhood here in Toronto in a denser form of housing, and then that multiplies many times over if you don't accommodate them in the existing neighborhood and you push them into greenfield development. And you're locking that in over many years. You're creating car trips that wouldn't happen otherwise, and that means that essentially we're tipping species at risk over the line into the direction that leads to extinction, and we're also really
Thank you
making
very
it.
much. That concludes the time. We now go to MPP Ray.
Thank you, Chair. Respectfully, I would disagree with some of the comments from Environmental Defence. I believe rural Ontario is a very beautiful place to live, and I know you would agree as well, Chair. For our new Canadians as well, many new Canadians are coming to my part of the world as well, which is wonderful to see. My question for George Brown, I know we had our time cut there. I just want to go back to the 18-story mass timber aspect around that. And I was wondering if you could sort of elaborate on, we're talking about the innovative techniques, but also the environmental impacts. You briefly mentioned it sort of at the end of your remarks there, and I just wondered if you could expand a bit on that.
Yeah, so there are, a number of other technologies we're using at Limberlost, which are contributing to it being a net zero emissions building. That includes deep lake water cooling, also includes operable windows. It's on a district energy network. But going back to the mass timber, because the highest causes of GHG emissions in the construction industry are through concrete and steel. So we need to minimize the amount of concrete and steel that we use. Now, it's very difficult at the moment to not use any. There are still some structural elements that do require in a high rise some concrete and steel elements, but we can dramatically change the GHG emissions and provide the opportunity for carbon capture through mass timber. And the more that we can adapt developments to mass timber technologies, the more that we can do that and make that happen across Ontario.
Great. Thank you. I defer my time to MPP Anand.
MPP Anand.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, my colleague, for that question. And I want to continue that conversation. I want to start with the university McMaster. Sarah, nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Quickly, I'm not as young as my colleague Matthew, but he always talks about it. But I do have young children, and both of my kids are in the university. One of the challenges we faced, housing is great, but the meal plan is very expensive, and it's required, especially for the first-year students. Talking about in this bill, universities like colleges would no longer be subject to municipal planning approvals, which would save years in approval avoid application fees, and remove barrier to the building higher density student residence. And let's put everything together is going to reduce your cost of building and operating, which means you have a lower cost. How will that help the students? Will that savings be passed on back to the students?
Absolutely. As you heard me say earlier on, and through you, Mr. Chair, thank you for the good question. I have university-going kids as well, and we understand what you're talking through. So the meal plan, very quickly, is a limit set by CRA, and I know we're talking about housing here today, so I'll stick to your question. As you heard us say, when we build the residences ourselves, we cannot offer it much cheaper. When we have to go for private dollars, they definitely are cheaper than the market, but not as cheap as what we do here with the on campus, or when we build the building ourselves on our own properties. So definitely it is a very, very well-defined process of setting those fees based on the cost incurred, the time gained in not having a process through. So very, very precisely answering your question, if we have the money to build it ourselves, we will build it faster, cheaper, and the cost would be passed on to the students. We're not in the business of a bottom line here.
Okay, you briefly touched upon the meal plan, so I actually will like to talk about a meal plan. I mean, we did had a conversation with another college or university. I don't remember what was the name. They actually said we are making it optional going forward. How is that possible? They are able to do it, you're not able to do it.
The optional means that it is then gets more expensive for those who want the plan. What we have done this year is we used to be only 1 year locked in. We have said you can use it year over year. So you don't have to lock it in 1 year. There is a minimum CRA threshold. McMaster, has always been on the lower quartile of our meal plan. Each university sets it differently, and we have said you can use it year over year rather than just locking it in a year.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say this government is all about more choices and transparency, and this is why I think it is better that if you can go back, take a look at it and help the students, especially those who can't afford. Over to MPP Patrice.
MPP Barnes.
Thank you. I'll direct both my questions to both universities and college, if you can weigh in. So we've talked about really constructing student housing. You've talked about two of the things that have been barriers in regards to one of the things that we're removing here, the planning piece around getting house to market, as well as the financing portion that creates barriers. My other question is there something else that creates a barrier for colleges and universities to build that you'd like to put on the table today? I'll start with George Brown.
Thank you very much for the question. I think there are various pieces in the planning. Really, it's about planning, it's about financing, but it's also about understanding the broader needs of our students. It takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a whole community to be able to support our students. And so thinking more holistically, our campus is the community is our campus. If we're solving the broader community problems, we're also solving the issues for our students, and housing affordability, particularly in Toronto, really is impacting everyone. So the more we can do to collectively work to resolve that issue, the more that we're helping our students as well as our broader community.
Thank you. McMaster?
Yeah, and Michelle actually nailed it down. It's the same thing. Obviously, financing. Universities are able to raise debts and get financing. However, that affects their credit rating, and the market is really very expensive to raise. So capital, time of build, or leading to shovel in the ground are the two biggest barriers. If we have money and if we have a shorter process, we will continue to commit to build more and house as many students as need to be housed on campuses. So that would be our take on this as well.
Thank you very much. That concludes the time for that question. It also concludes the time for the panel. So we thank all the presenters this morning.